Good evening, everyone. This is podcast 7, chapter 7, performance assessment with group members myself, Jayana Humphrey, Caitlin Long, Aaliyah Miller, and Kwan Pulliam. So the learning targets for this week was plan a performance assessment, develop a performance task, audit performance task for quality, develop a general rubric, audit general rubrics for quality, and use performance assessments performatively with students. So, a brief overview in this chapter, we discussed performance assessments. Performance assessment begin with tasks that require students actually to demonstrate performance of certain skills or to create products that demonstrate mastery of certain standards of quality. Next, we evaluate the level of achievement by comparing each student's performance or product to predetermined levels of proficiency. Our goal is to make these subjective judgments as free mm, as free of bias as possible. And then lastly, we did this by devising clear and appropriate rubrics or rating guides that describe the range of quality from weak to strong, and then by learning to apply rubrics with consistency. And that was an overview what we will discuss.
All right, so I have objective one, which is more so planning a performing assessment. Of course, objective one focuses on understanding how to design meaningful assessments that allow students to demonstrate learning through performance or products. In chapter seven, planning a performance assessment begins with identifying the purpose of the assessment and how the results will be used. Of course, teachers or educators must determine who will use the information and whether the assessment will support instruction, feedback, student self assessment, or grading. Once the purpose is clear, teachers identify the specific learning targets. The assessment is meant to measure and ensure that the performance task aligns with those targets. This process ensures that the assessment accurately reflects what students are expected to know or do. Of course, performance assessments allow students to demonstrate learning through actions, products, or performances, not just traditional tests. The first step is identifying the purpose of the assessment. Who will use the results? How will the results be used? Feedback, grading, or instruction. Teachers must clearly identify the learning targets before designing the test. The assessment must align with what students are ac- um, actually supposed to learn. And then planning also includes deciding the appropriate assessment method and ensuring the test provides enough evidence of the student learning. And lastly, for objective one, a well planned performance assessment helps teachers see deeper understanding, skills, and reasoning from students. I also have objective two, which is developing the performance task. Objective two highlights the importance of creating effective tasks that allow students to demonstrate mastery through authentic work. Chapter 7 explains that performance tasks should require students to apply knowledge, reasoning, and skills in a real or meaningful context. High quality performance tasks include clear instructions, a description of the expected product or performance materials needed, timelines, and evaluation criteria. These tasks should align directly with the learning targets and give students an opportunity to demonstrate their understanding through actions such as presentations, reports, investigations, or projects. When designed well, performance tasks provide deeper insight into student learning than traditional assessments alone. Performance tasks also require students to apply knowledge in real or meaningful situations. High quality tasks clearly explain what the student must do, the type of product or performance is expected of the task, materials needed, time frame or completion, how the work will be also evaluated. Tasks should also connect um, directly to the learning targets being assessed. Real world or authentic context can help students see the relevance of what they are learning. Well designed tasks provide strong evidence of student reasoning skills and understanding.
So objective number three is audit performance tasks for quality. So performance tasks can be fun and motivational for students, but sometimes they do also provide less information needed to support the intended use or students run out of time and cannot finish. So there is criteria to a high quality performance task, such as the content of the task, feasibility and fairness, and sample size. Content of the task is the first criteria. So think about what information you will provide and the timeline for completion. It should be reasonable for completion given your task requirements. For the second criteria, feasibility and fairness, once your task is drafted and there are seven factors to help review it for feasibility and fairness. Number one is time allowed. Number two is resources required. Number three is instructions provided. Number four is level of scaffolding. Number five is help allowed. Number six, choice. And number seven, avoidance of bias. The last criteria is sample size. So to generate a sample size, think about how the information will be used and the scope of the learning target to be assessed. So what decisions will the results inform? Summative or formative? Will the decision carry high or low stakes? All of these criteria tasks can ensure performance tasks have quality. So objective four is develop general rubrics. So this part of the performance section is where you are describing what counts. It's good to include examples of student work to show the level of proficiency, as well as descriptive language. We use rubrics to translate our expectations as teachers into student-friendly language. You want to focus on rubric structure, which could be holistic or analytic. Holistic has only one rating scale, and analytic has two or more. Holistic is for less complex learning targets, and analytic rubrics are best suited for complex, such as giving arguments using clear and relevant evidence. There are some traits that can go into an analytic rubric, such as content, organization, delivery, and language use. So you'll want to think about the content of the rubric. Is it quality or not? Does this rubric define the intended learning target? And does it align with it? So the 6 steps to creating a rubric are: number one, establish knowledge base. Number two, collect samples of student work and sort them according to levels of quality. Number three, identify the key characteristics that differentiate levels of quality. Number four, determine whether you create an, an analytical or holistic rubric. And number five, define levels of quality and identify anchor papers. Number six, practice applying the rubric, revising it as needed. And then this process sounds complex, but it lasts a long time and helps students achieve successfully.
Yeah, and I agree. When I was looking at the chapter, I felt like rubrics do take a long time to create, especially quality ones, but then hopefully you can kind of reuse them for different projects or different things and just change, the content of what they're measuring. So I thought it's a lot of work on the front end, but worth it. So I had objective 5, which was audit general rubrics for quality. And so the three criteria that you're auditing for is content, structure, and descriptors. I really liked that the chapter had the rubric for the rubrics. So criterion 1 was the content, and it was checking for target alignment and matching to the essential elements that you need. Criterion 2 was for structure, and so it was the number of criteria, the independence of criteria, the grouping of descriptors, and the number of levels. Number 3 was the descriptors in the rubric, so the kind of detail, the content of levels, and the formative usefulness. So all of these things are things we need to think about when assessing for quality. Another part of this chapter was the bias for the inter-rater agreement. So, knowing going into it that performance assessments are subjective and that these rubrics especially if they're high quality, help combat bias. One of the things it talked about was having, two raters evaluate the same performance with the same rubric. And without talking about it, you should be able to draw the same conclusion as to the level of what that student would be rated at for that performance. While that's not always um, possible with time and resources and things like that, it just said checking for bias with others when possible, um, even if it's just a small sample size, is important to kind of making sure your rubric is not biased and you're using it in an unbiased way as much as possible. It also talked about refining the assessment and making note of difficulties that students have with the content or with the understanding of the rubric, and also making notes while you are assessing students, um, any issues you find with scoring, because that rubric may need to be refined further as you continue to use it or use it again in future semesters. Um, so all in all, I think that it was talking about, how rubrics are a good way to kind of eliminate as much bias as possible, but in creating that rubric, making sure those things are present definitely helps up the quality of the rubric and therefore ups the quality of the assessment.
I had objective 6, using performance assessment formatively with students. And as we've seen from the previous chapters, using performance usually does have 7 strategies. So, strategy 1, provide a clear and understandable vision of the learning target. So, with this, we would create a student friendly version of the rubric that introduces the concepts of quality represented on it. Strategy 2, use examples and models of strong and weak work. So use carefully selected examples that represent the range of quality. This can create and refine students' understanding of the learning target, helping them answer the question: what defines quality work and what are some problems to avoid? Having students evaluate work anonymously using the rubric is a great example of modeling. Strategy 3, offer regular descriptive feedback during the learning. So create or revise rubrics so that they can function as feedback to students. Make sure they are aware of the criteria that constitutes quality and the use of language on the rubric to provide strengths and the next step feedback on their practice work. Examples of this include highlighting phrases on the rubric that describe their strengths or weaknesses. Strategy 4, teach students to self assess and set goals for the next steps. So, have students use the language of the rubric to identify their own strengths and areas for improvement. Then, have them make a revision plan detailing what they will do to strengthen their areas needing work. Strategy 5, use evidence of student learning needs to determine next steps in teaching. So evaluate students' practice work with the rubric and use the information to figure out which students need reteaching, which students will be able to move forward with feedback, and which students only need the opportunity to self-assess and plan for their own steps. Strategy 6, design focused instruction followed by practice with feedback. If you are working on a learning target having more than one concept of quality, consider focusing instruction on just one aspect of the learning target, giving students practice with that one aspect and offering feedback on their practice work for just that one aspect of quality before moving on to the next concept. And lastly, strategy 7, provide opportunities for students to track, reflect on, and share their learning progress. Establish a system like a portfolio that lets students track their learning along the way. Have them include their work, any feedback they received, revisions they made, and their own self assessments, and any goal they set for further work. Have them reflect on the contents of the portfolio, summarize their progress, and comment on it.
Yeah, and I think part of a portfolio, at least when I was in school, a lot of times they would include a rubric for students to rate themselves or their group that would, be similar to the one the teacher had, which I think is like helpful for students to kind of think about where they think they're at. And then when they have the two, they can look side by side of what the teacher thought as well. I also had reflection number one, which was which ideas did you find most convincing or useful and why? And so I really thought about how the performance based tasks are really unique forms of assessment because they're so varied. It's not a standardized test or a written response test. So I think that um, it can be used to kind of be more creative in your assessment, and you can find a little bit more um, assessments that like match your students or what you're really trying to get them to learn, especially for some of our classes that are more, not exactly like memorizing facts or things like that. So I think that using these performance based assessments, while they take more time maybe to grade or more time to create, they are sometimes the best match for what we're trying to get students to learn and provide evidence that they actually have learned it. I also think that with the time of creating those assessments, um, like I said earlier, it takes time to create rubrics, especially strong rubrics. And sometimes I'm like, oh, I don't necessarily have time for that or don't feel like I have time for that. So I do think that it is really useful. And as a student, I really like getting rubrics for assignments because I do feel like then I can like see exactly what the teacher is wanting from me and like make sure that I have each of those elements in my product or paper or whatever the case may be um, to show what they're learning. So I do think that it helps students um, more accurately know what teachers want. And so as a student, I like that. So I want to make sure that when I'm in my classroom, I think about it from that perspective as well.
So I have reflection number two, which is how does this chapter align with your own beliefs about teaching/learning? So, as an educator, I believe performance assessments can be useful as long as they provide good results. I believe that it's important to go through all of these processes, keeping in mind how students view your tasks and rubrics and make them as student friendly as possible depending on your age group. So curriculums will change as years go on. So finding assessment methods that best suit the majority of your students each year is a hard task, but it helps during your testing times during the school year. I also think it's beneficial to receive feedback from students. So on if your instruction has been made clear, was it simple enough to understand what to do, etc. So as a teacher, I actively try to find ways to involve and slash engage students in different processes. And with more experience, I'll gain more feasible ways to accomplish it.
I had reflection three. Which strategy or idea from this chapter would you feel most confident implementing and why? And I said developing or selecting the scoring rubric. That was something I often did when I was student teaching in a high school classroom, and I became really familiar with developing scoring rubrics. It allowed me to communicate my expectations to students on paper so that they knew so they knew exactly what was expected of them. And I would often use a mix of analytical and holistic depending on what class the rubric was for and what the assignment was.
Cool. I had reflection four. Chapter seven deepened my understanding of how performance assessments allow students to demonstrate learning through meaningful tasks and authentic applications of knowledge. One of the most important takeaways from this chapter is that the emphasis on designing assessments that align directly with the intended learning target. When teachers carefully plan performance assessments, they ensure that students are demonstrating the specific knowledge, reasoning skills, or products that the instruction was designed to develop. Another key idea that stood out to me was the importance of creating clear and structured performance tasks. The chapter explains that high quality tests should include specific directions, required materials, timelines, and clear evaluation criteria so that students fully understand expectations before completing the actual task. This approach not only improves the reliability of the assessment, but also helps reduce confusion or bias that may affect the student performance. Additionally, the discussion of rubrics reinforced the importance of transparency in the assessment. Rubrics provide a structured way to evaluate student work by outlining different levels of performance and clearly defining what quality works, what quality work looks like. Whether the teacher uses holistic or analytic rubrics, these tools help ensure consistency in grading while also providing students with the valuable feedback on their strengths and areas for improvement. As an educator, of course, this chapter connects strongly to my own teaching practice because performance assessments are often used within family and consumer science courses. Many of the projects and hands on activities within my classroom, such as financial literacy stimulations, nutrition planning activities, and design based projects, require students to apply what they have learned rather than simply recall information. Understanding how to design effective performance tests and rubrics will help me ensure that these activities accurately measure student learning while also promoting deeper engagement and real world application of skills. Overall, Chapter 7 emphasizes that effective performance assessment requires intentional planning, clear expectations, and thoughtful evaluation tools. When implemented correctly, these assessments can provide richer evidence of student learning and better prepare students to apply their knowledge in authentic situations.
Do you all, before we close, do you all use rubrics regularly in your classes, or is there a different system you use for your performance-based skills?
Um, I would say a little bit of both, depending on what we're doing. I know, like specifically when it comes to projects, like I want to see like the full creativeness and the full thought out process of you actually walking out the entire project and not just giving me like, oh well, I'm done type of thing. And then I'd be like, well, refer to the rubric because you're missing X, Y, and Z. Or if like we're cooking and stuff like that, I do have like a rubric prepared for them. Um and making sure that like they're following their steps when we're in the kitchen and not forgetting a step or missing a step and then reminding them of what it is that they are missing so that way they can improve the next go round.
Yeah. And Johnny, you said you used it a lot for student teaching, but probably not as much for preschool. Aaliyah, do you use rubrics in your class?
So I definitely want to get into more of using rubrics. I'm gonna be honest, I might sometimes be a little lazy on creating those, so I'll just like walk the students through how to do what I'm like, expecting, more so than like typing it out and all that. But yeah,
No, same,
And,
same.
and I would add to that, like even down to because of course I believe it's two of us that teach middle school. Um,
mhm.
when it comes to like because I feel like this generation they don't have like a sense of writing technique or creative writing in a sense. Like just as simple as doing like their bell ringers or reflections, like they have a rubric to follow for that. Like I need 3 to 5 full complete sentences. I need stuff to be spelled correctly. Of course, if you don't know how to spell it, I'm not expecting you to spell it off gate, but ask. Because you're gonna get into a point in life where whether if you are in high school or if you are in college, like they're gonna hold your intellect to a high regard. And I feel like in middle school, like after they have like their ELA or even math, it's just kind of like, oh, like, well, I'm not gonna really use this or need it, but I'm just like, it's the y'all are too intellectual to give me like an incomplete sentence or a vague response, like elaborate, tell me more, give me more. And then sometimes they get mad at me and frustrated with me. And I do both. I have them do work on their Chromebooks and then I do traditional teaching too. And when we do the traditional teaching, they be like, I gotta write all of that. And I'd be like, why not? Like, I hear the conversations that y'all have at y'all age. I mean, some is just like out of this world, but if you can give that, you can be creative and you can also write and also follow the rubric of what is being presented to you. It's not me picking on you or me um trying to test your intellect. The intellect I'm not worried about. I know that's there. It's the taking it above and beyond and a step further just a little bit and going and seeing if you can really go like the extra mile.
Yeah. And having the rubric there, like, takes that out of, like, "Oh, well, like, you're being hard on me." Like, "No, this is the rubric, and you
Mm-hmm.
haven't met these things, or you've met 3 of these things, but not this one," or whatever. So I think
Hmm.
that helps show them those things for sure. Okay. Well, as we're closing, so just to review the objectives of this chapter, they were planning performance assessments, developing performance tasks, auditing performance tasks for quality, developing general rubrics, auditing general rubrics for quality, and using performance assessment formatively with students. And so I do think it was a helpful chapter, um, especially for our content areas, to think about and making sure that, we do um, have quality assessments for these things, and that when we are assessing them using rubrics, that those rubrics are quality as well.
This is good.